All right, everybody. Well, welcome to the program. My name is Emilio Ramos. It's good to be with you. I haven't posted anything in a while, but we are resuming uploading episodes to the Red Grace Media channel. And so today, I want to welcome you guys back and just let you guys know that we will be uploading episodes to Red Grace Media again, hopefully on a very regular basis. And today, I just want to introduce the subject that we're going to be talking about, which is eschatology and apologetics. Now, one of the reasons for this is because of a recent interview that I did with Chris Artisan on Iron Sharpens Iron. I love Chris. I love his show. I love being on there. And anytime I get to visit with Chris or see him is always a good time. And so talking to him was really encouraging. But he had me on the program to talk about transhumanism, which I find myself talking a lot about transhumanism. Actually, recently did some episodes with Living Waters and Ray Comfort and those guys on this very subject. And the episode with Chris Artisan was, I think, was the show that you need to go and listen to, because it was an in-depth program, and I really appreciate Iron Sharpens Iron because they allowed me to go in depth and not be rushed, and sort of take my time and go deeper into these subjects that I think are very important for us to talk about. But today, I want to kind of pick up on that conversation, not to talk about transhumanism, but really to talk about eschatology, because during the question and answer period of that program, a lot of the conversation, a lot of the questions from the audience had to do with eschatology, and not surprising, because when you're talking about things like technocracy, when you're talking about things like implantable technology, when you're talking about things like globalism, of course, people are going to be concerned from an eschatological perspective. They're going to wonder, well, how does that fit with my eschatological scheme? If you're post-millennial, for example, how does what is going on right now in the world regarding transhumanism and the futurist dream, as I call it, how does that fit into my idea that the world, in a sense, eventually will get better until it is finally ultimately Christianized? How does it fit into a pre-tribulational position, or a pre-trib or premillennial position, when you think that Christ is going to return to rapture, let's say, the church out, and those kinds of things? And what should be our engagement as we're looking forward to those events, let's say from a pre-mill perspective, or even a non-millennial perspective, which is my position. How does that affect the way that you live, the way that you interpret these events? And so what bearing does eschatology have on apologetics at large? So let me just begin by saying that eschatology cannot be divorced from protology. And so if you haven't understood the concept of protology, that is super important for you to know, because protology is inextricable from eschatology. You can't separate the two. The two are connected completely. When you look at the theology of the Bible, Protology, the first 3 chapters, mainly, you can extend that to chapter 11 of Genesis, but when you look at the first 3 chapters of Genesis, and you look at eschatology proper, when you look, for example, at the end of the Bible, Revelation 21 and 22, let's say, those two things come together repeatedly, the themes of Genesis and the themes of Revelation. And so it's important to understand that when we think of eschatology, you can't really divorce what God is saying from the very beginning, because, as Isaiah says, he declares the end from the beginning. And when we think about the beginning, then of course we're talking there about concepts like the image of God. We're thinking of the image of God, and what we find in biblical theology is that the image of God is really something of an eschatologically limiting concept. In other words, It sort of regulates what we talk about, what we think about on eschatology on a myriad of levels. And so when we think about the image of God, we understand that the image of God is not just telling us that man has dignity. It's not just telling us that man has worth. But the image of God is also telling us that man was created teleologically. In other words, you're created with a purpose, you're created with a design, you're created with an ultimate goal in mind. And as you think about the image of God, therefore, we connect to this idea of taking the image of God and advancing it forward and upward, as it were. We're taking the image of God and the creature made in God's image, and we're asking the question, how does the image of God go to the next level, which is to ask, how does a person, and more importantly, how does mankind move to the next level or to a higher quality of life? And that is where somebody like Gerhardus Voss is very instrumental. I would encourage you to read, for example, the Pauline Eschatology, where he begins there and in other places to advance this notion of what he called the deeper Protestant conception and how humankind is going to advance forward. And of course, for Voss, all of that had to do with the doctrine of the Spirit. And critical to that doctrine would be a passage like 1 Corinthians chapter 15. So the image of God has everything to do with eschatology, with advancing humanity forward and into eternity. And of course, there we're thinking of theology like glorification. And also, the image of God connects us to the overarching structure of the Bible, specifically in the idea that the Bible is constructed along what we have in theology, what we call the two-age structure. There's the present age, and then there is the age to come. Now, as the creature of God, the image of God, Adam was created to not only know God in the garden, to have religious fellowship with God, to have a knowledge of God, to walk with God, to obey God, and to be God's creature under his law, under his command, and more importantly, under his covenant. And so in covenant theology, we would refer to that as a covenant of works, where Adam was meant to obey God in the garden, to serve him, and to keep the garden. The Hebrew word there, shamar, which then in the rest of the Bible, especially if you look at somewhere like Numbers, for example, you see that the keeping of the garden is a priestly sort of phenomenon, a priestly duty, a guardian duty. And so when Adam fails, he sins in the garden, he is replaced by a cherub who guards, and he uses the same exact language there in Genesis, who the angel takes the place of the man to guard the way back to the tree of life, for example. And so it uses the same Hebrew word there, shamar. I don't know if I said Greek, but it's a Hebrew word. And therefore, you get this idea that Adam was meant to fulfill his task in the garden, and that he would go from this world, from this present state of things, to the next. Now, again, that's before the fall. Now, after the fall, in a sense, that basic two-age structure hasn't changed. We still need to advance humanity out of the present age and into the age to come. The question that becomes, how do you do that? Well, you don't do that anymore by keeping the law of God. At least we don't. And of course, that connects us to the second Adam, who through his act of obedience, his act of law keeping, of being faithful to the covenant of God, then does result in the justification of his people, Romans chapter 5, especially verses 12 through 19. And through that one act of obedience, which is, I think, talking about the totality of Jesus' life, then humanity will once again be advanced forward into the age to come, into the heavenly realm, if you like, into the Sabbath realm that God had set in front of man in the protological order, in the protological world of the Garden of Eden. The Sabbath was a sign of taking humanity to that next level or a higher form of life even beyond Eden, so that Eden becomes, as Reformed theology has taught for centuries, Eden becomes the occasion of Adam's probation. Now, when we think about Adam's probation, of course, we are thinking here mainly about Adam obeying the covenant of works and advancing forward to a new creation. And that new creation is therefore that higher form of life. Now, the reason I bring all that in together is because I believe that as we advance as a society, as we move forward to what now has been sort of revealed and made evident by the way that society is going, mainly that we are moving increasingly towards a technological future. There is no way around this at this point, where it very quickly is going to require of us not only to understand our eschatology, but to connect eschatology to the concept of teleology, to the concept of purpose, that man has a purpose. He was created for a goal. We love to say, as confessional believers, we love to say the chief end of man, of course, is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Man has a chief end. He has a goal. He was created with a purpose, a higher purpose, something even beyond himself, outside of himself, that God has ordained for him. Now, you understand, this world does not believe that. They don't believe that God has your best interest in mind. This world, and particularly to the degree that this world and this society and this culture and our governments and the world rulers that are out there, to the degree that they are connecting you to this digital technocratic future, to that degree, they don't agree that man advances somehow through the Spirit of God, because of the image of God, into a new creation. No, in fact, when you look at the transhumanist language, the futurist language, it's eschatological to the core. But that eschatological language, they use, what's kind of crazy about this is that they actually use the very same language that you find in the Bible. They speak of a glorious future. They speak of a new creation. They speak of an Edenic condition. They speak of heavenizing the world through technology, where they even, some of these futurists and transhumanists that I've read, men like Hans Marovich and Ray Kurzweil and others, they won't hesitate. Max Moore, Vita Natasha Moore, these kinds of folks, they don't hesitate to talk about the fact that we're going to essentially terraform reality, that we're going to turn the entire world and its atmosphere into some sort of digital synthetic nanotechnology, and that the world will basically be so filled with nanotech that the world will become basically a data colony. I mean, this is what these folks are talking about. Now, to be crystal clear, I don't actually believe that future is even viable. I do not believe that we're heading towards Star Wars. We're not going to be creating planets like the Death Star and things like that. However, it's the worldview behind it that we need to really pay attention to, because it is fundamentally rationalistic. It is post-Enlightenment thinking that is rooted in an evolutionary cosmology that believes that not only is evolution true, but that now we can actually control evolution, and that we can advance ourselves through a sort of manipulation of the evolutionary process. In a word, the word they like to use is that we're entering into almost post-evolutionary times. We're entering into times where we will self-evolve, or what some futurists have called that we will bypass the evolutionary process. We're not going to wait around anymore for evolution to take place. We will do it ourselves, and we will give ourselves, for example, this goes all the way from, concepts like virtual reality, implantable technology, which is here, which is developing, which is getting increasingly immersive, which is becoming increasingly more and more integrated with with the world system as a whole, everything from technology to the economy to the moral fabric of society is becoming more and more digital, more and more virtual, and more sort of integrated in technology down to implantable technology. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw the recent, the recent event by Elon Musk dealing with Neuralink. I watched the entire 2-hour episode of that, where they showed you exactly how they plan on putting a BMI in your head, a brain machine interface technology, basically some sort of computer chip into your skull so that you can have immediate access to the internet directly into your brain. And of course, this is always couched in the language of, well, we're going to help people with disabilities and diseases. But of course, that's not the agenda. And you know that it's not the agenda because Elon Musk himself has said that he hopes that in the very near future, he will, the next time we see him, he will in fact have his own Neuralink connected to his brain. And I mean, the last time I checked, Elon Musk is not a paraplegic. He's not paralyzed. He doesn't have some debilitating disease. And so, no, actually the rollout of this, the target audience or the target consumer for this are not the disabled people in society. No, it's everybody that has a perfectly healthy, functioning body, but that will accept or will embrace this message of self-advancement through technology. And so, I mean, this is happening on so many different levels. I mean, we think about what's happening with virtual reality. It seems like now if you turn on the television, every other commercial has to do with the metaverse, as if people really want to walk around with these giant goggles on their head. I mean, it's absurd, but what's happening is slowly but surely the VR world is dictating to the real world what's going on. So right now, what's happening in the VR world is that what I like to call PR to VR, so that the physical world is still, in a sense, programming the virtual world. But I think that we're going to very quickly enter into a time where, and some would say we're already there, where the VR world is dictating the PR world. In other words, people are finding their significance not in what they can bring to the VR world, but what the VR world can bring to them. And that is certainly going to accelerate the more and more powerful companies, the tech titans, all of these folks are more and more going to push towards some sort of VR expression. Of course, Apple getting ready to release their own version of the metaverse, their own version of an all-immersive VR experience for consumers. And so some, there's debate, those that are really, really in the know technologically, I guess you could say, they are debating how much of that is going to succeed. Some people are saying that the metaverse is a colossal failure. Nobody wants to wear these stupid things. They get tired of it very quickly. But what happens when the metaverse is connected to everything that you love, everything that you're involved in, everything that's meaningful to you in this society, particularly economically and in terms of your social experience and your social connection to the world? So that social media, for example, gets absorbed into the VR world. That can motivate people to have to put on something like a VR set of goggles, Oculus or whatever. See, but I'm concerned more about the worldview implication of these things. We're living in a world, when you think about teleology, when you think about man's design, when you think about man's purpose in this world, of course, as many books that have recently come out, well, an old classic book would be Philip Reef. Philip Reef's book, The Therapeutic, the Triumph of the Therapeutic, is a devastating expose of what I can only call, what others would call selfism, just the idea of complete and total narcissistic absorption of the self, where the self must be at all costs. The self must be allowed to express itself in any way that it wants to, and that what makes the self healthy, of course, is sort of this therapeutic model for your psychological well-being and these kinds of things. And that, Carl Trueman's recent book on of the modern self, the triumph of the modern self. I can't remember. I have that book around here somewhere. But, these kind of books are coming out to say, hey, we're in a time in our culture right now where self-expression is reigning supreme, where everything is about the right to express yourself in every direction, artistically, aesthetically, through fashion, obviously through social media, and then even deeper than that, anthropological categories like your sexuality, those kinds of things. And therefore, when we think about man's purpose will increasingly be determined by their ability to self-express. And that certainly has major ramifications for what is going to happen in this culture, anthropologically, sociologically, and philosophically, because all of those things are connected. Now, again, as we think about the question of what will move humanity forward, the question is a question of either autosoterism, self-salvation in a sense, or theosotericism, or theosoteric models of interpreting human experience. Do we advance ourselves through technology materialistically? And if we do that, then of course you're thinking about man's own power, man's own ability, man's own knowledge, and man's own innovation. Is that the way that man is going to advance forward? And again, that is a purely post-Enlightenment humanistic way of thinking that ultimately gave birth to evolution and that way of thinking. See, when we talk about these technologies, it's not just about the application. You have to ask the question of the foundation of the worldview from which it came. And what is going on today in the area of transhumanism? The very thing that I tried to express there on Iron Sharpens Iron was this idea that transhumanism is rooted in an evolutionary presupposition for your worldview. And that presupposition is fundamentally pardon the pun, but it's anti-fundamentalist. In other words, it operates on the idea that human nature is malleable, that it's pliable, that human nature, matter of fact, if you look at the transhumanist literature, as I have, in multiple books, human nature is deficient. Human nature is limited, and it becomes almost a moral, spiritual issue that we cannot, if we truly care about mankind, we cannot leave mankind in the condition that it's in. Human nature basically needs to change. We need to make it something else. And so that's where we move out of the realm, for some anyway, at least theoretically. It will never happen. But this is an image of God issue, where they would say, we move out of the realm of transhumanism and into the realm of post-humanism. Because, according to many of these transhumanists, we are moving technologically in such a direction, changing and tampering with man, bioengineering, everything else, where it is no longer right to call people human, Homo sapien, in the traditional meaning of the term. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that they want to talk about. But, of course, we understand from the Christian worldview that we're thinking about humanity advancing through the Spirit. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 42 to 49, when Christ resurrected from the dead, he became life-giving pneuma. He became a life-giving spirit, which basically means he now has become so aligned with the Holy Spirit that as he imparts the Spirit to his people, and especially as he advances his people through the resurrection into a higher form of life and into a new realm, new age, new world, new creation, in a word, heaven, then we are saved supernaturally, not materialistically. We are saved by the power of God. We are not saved by our own innovation, our own wisdom, our own knowledge, our own ability. So it's theosoteric, not autosoteric. We don't save ourselves. We don't put hope in ourselves. See, when you think about what the futurists are saying, when you think about famous transhumanists like Ray Kurzweil, they are banking on the idea that if you just hold out long enough, if you just live long enough, you will live long enough to get sort of installments of technology. Incrementally, you will get more and more technology that would allow you to be healed from diseases, to regenerate your cells, to extend your life, to be able to live easily past 120 years old. And that if you live that long, then you'll hold on long enough. I mean, I've watched lectures, repeated lectures, and listened to podcasts with Ray Kurzweil and others that are in fact doing that very thing. They're saying just live long enough till you get to the real, true, radical, life-extending technology, so that their hope is in that. And so again, it becomes a form of self-salvation. Now, finally, I just want to talk about this, and that is eschatology proper, not just looking at eschatology in terms of the image of God, not just looking at eschatology in terms of the covenantal framework of Protology of Genesis 1 through 3, Adam, the covenant of works, and of course the covenant of grace after that. But when you think about eschatology proper, the actual end times, it does become important, because at some point we're going to have to give an account for the world around us as it is developing. I mean, think about what we're going through right now. In 2023, we are talking about nuclear war with Russia. What kind of a world are we living in, where man not only has the ability to destroy themselves, but lives under the threat of that very thing? And that becomes a very real and a very viable threat. It's unbelievable, a very viable reality. And so as we think about society developing in these technocratic ways, as the world becomes more globalist, what is the Christian response? And I don't think the world is going to respond very well to technocracy. I expect for people to obviously not simply fall in line, but I think there will be people in society. I think society will, in a sense, reject. I think there will be an initial strife, and they talk about these things. I mean, I can show you these books here, but a book like this, The Age of Spiritual Machines by Ray Kurzweil, in those kinds of books, and I've got stacks of them, these futurists are talking about the idea that there is a neo-Luddite movement coming. Of course, the neo-Luddites come from Ned Ludd, an historically a weaver in England around the Industrial Revolution that protested against the innovations of technology then that were putting these weavers out of business. And those protests became known as the Luddite movement, and they became violent because they thought, hey, wait a minute, this is the well-being of my family. This is the well-being of our homes, our children, our families, and our livelihoods are at stake. You're putting us out of business. We can't possibly compete with the machines. Ray Kurzweil says that in the future, there will be necessarily neo-Luddite conflicts that will turn violent. Well, you can do whatever you want with those predictions by Ray Kurzweil, but I think there's something to that people will fight encroaching technocratic measures. But I want to remind, and people say, well, people will never accept that en masse. People aren't just going to be lining up to get computer chips in their head or in their hands or in their bodies, or nanotechnology ingested into their bodies to change their DNA and things like that, manipulate their at the cellular level, manipulate and bioengineer themselves. Okay, well, that's fine. I think on the face of it, some people would say, no, people will actually sign up for those kinds of things. Okay, say what you want, but I just want to remind us all of 2020 and the fact that overnight we were thrust into the kind of world where we were told, stand 6 feet apart on these stickers in the grocery store. You got to wear a face diaper over your mouth everywhere you go. And you can't come out of your home. Everything is canceled. You can't go to your place of employment. And boy, did society instantaneously comply. And are we watching the developments through this technological advancements in technology, and the kinds of things that futurists are predicting that pretty soon we may find ourselves in that very thing? I mean, society gave up those kinds of grounds without a whimper. Can you imagine when you get to the level of technological advancement that these people are talking about? All I'm saying is that we're going to have to, from a Christian worldview, we're going to have to account for the way the world really is. And that's part of the reasons why I'm an amillennialist, because I believe that the world is not going to enter into some golden age 500 years from now, but I think that this world is consigned to wrath. I think that this world is destined to pass away. I think that this world is described in Scripture. Well, I don't think, I know. Ephesians chapter 2, it's the present evil age. And in other places, Galatians chapter 1, verse 4, it is the present evil age. In the book of Hebrews, the entirety of this age before the return of Jesus is described as a wilderness experience where the people of God are to endure and to persevere as they press on through this evil age, and they inevitably enter Canaan, the realm of Sabbath rest, as the true and better Joshua advances his humanity, his church, forward. See, the thing is, guys, is the way that we avoid talking about things on the surface is to recognize that the political conservative movements of the world, of America, take your pick. I would say this is not the apple of God's eye. When it gets to what God is really, what God is focusing our attention on, you think of the book of Revelation, his remnant, his people, his saints, his church. It is just that. It is the elect that he's concerned about, if I can use the word concern anthropologically, you know what I mean? Or anthropomorphically. But you know what I'm saying? That the focus is not on political groups or humanity in general. It's amazing to me, but we cannot just set our Calvinism aside. In Revelation, and as things progress eschatologically, God's interests lie with his people, the camp of the saints, his remnant, his elect, his chosen, those who are in union with Jesus Christ. That is God's concern when we think about all of these events unfolding. And of course, if we don't do that, in my opinion, we can end up just speaking in many of the same categories that the world does. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about eschatology and the things that, a lot of you that know Red Grace Media have talked to me personally about these issues, know how important I believe that this issue is. It goes right along with the things I'm developing in terms of the new apologetics as the church. I think as much as we want to focus on traditional concepts like the sufficiency of Scripture, Calvinism, the sovereignty of God, justification by faith, and those things, I think there's also a place for apologetics to also look forward to allow our apologetic horizon to expand to the things that we're facing in the 21st century. I believe we're facing unprecedented things in the 21st century that no other century saw. I really believe that. Matter of fact, one futurist said that the 20th century, I think it was Eric Schmidt, who says that the 20th century was 10 centuries in one. So we think about developments, innovation, growth, exponential growth of technology and things like that. And he asks, what will the 21st century be, especially with the projections that we have from the futurist and transhumanist community? I think it will be a tumultuous time. I think it's also a time of great opportunity for the gospel as we focus on man's true identity, as we focus on teleology, as we have a robust eschatological worldview that understands where man's advancement comes from, and as we develop robustly a doctrine of the image of God. And I think that those things need to come more and more, need to come to the fore as we engage in ministry, as we have our big conferences and our well-known theologians and pastors out there speak to the issues of the culture right now. We can no longer wait. We can no longer avoid talking about the things that we once thought were conspiratorial, or we once thought were maybe afar off. These are sci-fi things. This is Terminator. These are those kinds of things. No, we're actually there, guys. We're at a place now where our teenagers are called, according to the transhumanist community, digital natives. The children that are born today are growing up in a completely different kind of experience than ages past, where they don't know life apart from total technological immersion. And therefore, I think as Christians, when we think about the future of this technological world, this globalist world, we have to have, from a biblical perspective, we need to be prepared with a biblical apologetic and a robust eschatology that can answer the challenges of the 21st century. And so those are some of the things on my mind, and hopefully I'll be developing those things as well as other. Also, I'm working to also bring a different kind of experience to Red Grace Media, the YouTube channel, and possibly be joined by some good friends of mine to co-host along with me and tackle some of these things, and also practical theological things as well that we also want to tackle. But anyway, God bless you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. It's good to see everybody. And I will be, like I said, resuming posting videos on Red Grace Media's YouTube channel. Thanks. God bless.